So yesterday, when we chatted to Sadiq Sienkamp, the chairperson of SAMTOA, really about his current experiences in Medina, I think is where he was. The conversation then started from that, and he spoke at length about quotas and South Africa being categorized as a Muslim country and the implications thereof, and lobbying that needs to happen or is happening with DIRCO. But absent from that conversation was the role of SAHUC by and large. And we thought it was rather cryptic, that conversation, to me. So I thought, let's find out more about it from the SAHUC point of view, the South African Hajj and Umrah Council. And the chairperson there is Shaheen Essop. Shaheen, as always, assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show. Okay, we'll just try and connect. I think we are going to connect with Shaheen in just a second.
Are you guys
Okay.
there?
Yes, you're there and you're live. You can hear me, right?
Yes, I can. Assalamu alaikum
Okay.
wa rahmatullah to all of you in studio and to everyone at Salam Media and the viewers out there.
Alhamdulillah, indeed. Thank you. So you may have heard my intro, maybe not. The conversation I had with SAMTOA, Sadiq Sienkamp, yesterday. Now, I mean, the issue about quotas is a general conversation. I get that, right? Perhaps let's start with that one, right? So we know that the quota allocated for South African Hujjaj this year, my understanding, that number has not been given. So therefore, nobody knows whether they can actually go for Hajj at this point in time. Is that correct?
Absolutely so. I think the world over is waiting in anticipation and with bated breath for that information to be revealed. We've seen counterparts in other parts of the world, Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, all being very, very concerned about the late release of this information. By now, and I'm sure you remember when you went on Hajj a few years ago, by Ramadan you had already known whether you were going or not, and it becomes an administrative problem or a nightmare. But inshallah, we certainly will be able to overcome it as best we can as soon as the ministry does release that information to us. Now,
And I take it, no matter what the urgency from a SAHUC point of view, that is completely squarely on the shoulders of the Hajj ministry. I'm sure you've asked them, why do you think there's a delay?
Well, I think, we've just come out of 2 years of COVID. There's been no Hajj for internationals. I think they're crossing the T's, dotting the I's, making sure that everything is in place, not to have any pandemic spread from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and to ensure the safety and the, security of every pilgrim that comes from abroad. One can see the opening of Umrah and the influx of people from Umrah. They're possibly utilizing this as a yardstick and then extrapolating the results therefrom, in order to make sure that everything works according to plan for the Hajj and upcoming Hajj. You and I both know that, when we want to go for Hajj, it's probably a 6 to 8 week period that we'd like to be away. But as far as the kingdom is concerned, it's nothing more than a 2 to 3 week period, because the culmination or the pinnacle of Hajj being the 5 days in Zul Hijjah is ultimately what it's all about.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the rest of it is just, as you said, ziyarah in terms of extending your stay, right? But having said that, so I would guess then the idea of a 6 week Hajj is almost certainly out for South Africans. It's more than likely going to be 4 weeks maximum. I know we're speculating. I mean, more than likely, which means that maybe the first week after Eid is probably when they may give us those numbers, right? What are your expectations in terms of the numbers? I know it's difficult to say, but I mean, you must have some personal wish list here, right?
It's very difficult. I'd like to see an increase in the numbers based on the fact that our backlog needs to be reduced quite considerably. The fact that we haven't had Hajj for the last 2 years has resulted in a swollen queue, and that queue is just growing and burgeoning all the time. Now, it makes things very difficult for those people that are waiting in the queue. It makes things more anxious, and people become, anxiety driven as a result of that. We ask people just to be patient. Ultimately, we're the guests of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Yes, we're entitled to a quota, albeit that quota is determined on a ratio, like it is for every other country around the world. So we have to work according to that process, and we're the receivers, we're not the dictators.
Yeah, as per the last Hajj that South African Hujjaj were allowed to perform, what was the quota then? 2 years back, so 3 years ago.
That was 2019, and we had 2,500. They gave us an increase of 1,500, which took us to 4,000. In fact, in the 2020 Hajj, again, we negotiated an increase in the quota when we were there. From 2,500, they gave us an indication that it would be 3,500. But unfortunately, COVID, had other plans, and as a result of which nobody went in 2020 or 2021.
Okay, got that. Now, I had a chat with Sadiq Steenkamp from Semtoa, and he made the point about the fact that South Africa is described or categorized as a Muslim country versus a non-Muslim country limits South Africa's quota numbers, and therefore that's unfair, and that has to be changed. So two things: is South Africa categorized as a Muslim country by the Hajj authorities, and if so, why would that be the case?
Absolutely not. We, according to the last minutes of the meeting that the ministry had basically disseminated and shared with us in 2019, are categorically not stated as a Muslim country. It is very, very important that people understand. When we asked for the increase, as I made mention earlier, we asked for an increase of 1,000 people, for the 2020 Hajj. Ministry had indicated that initially we asked for 4,800. So the initial understanding was that we perceived the number of Muslims in our country to be 4.8 million out of a total of 56.7. Now, this is the way the ministry wrote that particular minutes. If they write minutes like that, it clearly indicates that we're not a Muslim country. What I think the misunderstanding is, we have a Hajj mission, or known as the Hajj Council. In the kingdom, it is regarded as a Hajj mission. There are 80 odd countries around the world who also have Hajj missions, Muslim as well as non-Muslim countries. India, for one, being included, some of the European countries being included. And these are categorized in an area probably called, Maktab Shu'un. Now, the Arabic translation, Maktab Shu'un, is offices of Hajj affairs for those particular countries. And this is where the majority of that 80 countries are possibly Muslim countries. Hence, the misconception or the confusion is that we're a Muslim country, but we're not. We may be bulked with them. A country like Australia, for example, who is not a Muslim country, who doesn't have a Hajj mission, has a quota of 3,000 people. So there is no increase or astronomical increase in the quota. Ashraf, people misunderstand this whole quota process. Back in 1986-87, the Hajj ministry gave that right to the OIC to determine a ratio for every country around the world. And they worked out that 1,000 pilgrims per 1 million Muslims is the ratio that is going to be acceptable given the space on the 5 days of Hajj. Mina is the biggest problem that you have. And I go back to 2019 when we received, 2019 when we received the extra 500 increase that took us to 4,000. The ministry wrote in its letter, due to the constraints in space, you need to ensure that your pilgrims understand they may be housed in Muzdalifah and not in Mina over that 5-day period. So these are issues that one needs to, grapple with and deal with. If we look at the number of Muslims in the world, 1.6 billion, if 25% of that are of economically active process and of baligh age, you're looking at 400 million people. 10% of that 400 million people can't converge on Makkah for Hajj. So therefore, a quota needs to be implemented. The argument is made for the United Kingdom, for example, where they have 23,000 people that come every year. They have a different relationship. Remember, the father of Saudi Arabia is the United Kingdom, as a result of which their economic relations, their diplomatic relations is very, very different to many other countries around the world. Nigeria is not a Muslim country, yet Nigeria sits with 100 million because the perception is they have 100,000. The perception is they have 100 million Muslims in that country. Likewise, India, they perceive that, or the figures given is 200 million. They have 200,000 Hujjaj that come.
I think I get that. So, I mean, the bottom line, to pick up on Sadiq Steenkamp's point, right? That do you think South Africa is being prejudiced by its current categorization, and therefore a recategorization via DIRCO would change sort of the prejudicial allocation of the quota to South Africa?
Ashraf, absolutely not. And we've been told this 1,000 times over by the Ministry of Hajj and Umrah. And the irony of the situation is that Sadiq Steenkamp was a previous board member of SAHUC and participated in the meetings with the ministry for 7 years up to the time of COVID. In 2019 was his last visit. And at that meetings, they very, very specifically and categorically inform you that this is how the quota is calculated and why the quota is calculated like that. The perception they're giving is that this is incorrectly recorded in the kingdom. South Africa is incorrectly recorded, which is not so. The unfortunate thing is the operators seem to have distanced themselves from SAHUC. And as a result of that, they're trying to go it on their own and look for quota on their own and trying to find a way to sideline SAHUC in this particular regard.
Okay, so that's the question I asked him, right? Because when he spoke about the quotas, I said, well, what is SAHUC's role in this? And are you speaking to SAHUC? And he mentioned that in fact we're speaking to Durko, and I said, why not SAHUC? And effectively was non-committal to that, suggesting that constitutionally there's space for more than one, let's call it, governing body. And without giving a name, he's of course talking about SAHUC. I mean, does he have a point?
I don't think he's got a point, because at the end of the day, if you look at the history or the foundation of SAHUC back in 1996, it was at the request of the Saudi government that the South African side actually organized themselves better, and that is what gave birth to SAHUC, from a point of view that Durko at that time was the DFA, called upon civic organizations, Islamic organizations, and political organizations to start this organization called SAHUC to deal with the matters relating to Hajj. Prior to that, there was no structure in South Africa because we were outside of democracy, and people would get their visas upon arrival. Now, if you look at what had transpired and the services that operators were giving to the pilgrims at that time, it was non-existent to a great extent. Pilgrims were left on the sides of the road, and as a result of which, a more organized structure had come. And if one looks at where SAHUC had started in 1996 to where it is today, I think you can bear testimony to that because you've been on Hajj before. It certainly has improved over the years, improved to an extent that in 2005, when I joined SAHUC, in Gauteng alone, there were 89 complaints against Hajj operators post-Hajj. In the last 5 years, there were 15 countrywide per annum. So that tells you that processes, structures, regulations have all come into being. The beauty part of all of this is that when the operators were a part of SAHUC, they were part and parcel of creating process and structure, and we included them in the development of policy, the development of structure, the development of everything that we wanted to do, which included them as part of the equation to service the pilgrim. We have always said, the success of Hajj is not SAHUC. The success of Hajj is SAHUC and its affiliates, which means the operators. And that makes a great success for the pilgrim or the end user out there. But unfortunately, due to COVID, there was a lot of operators who had monies that needed to be refunded. When SAHUC started putting pressure on them, the alienation then started in that regard.
Okay, so I understand that. I'm aware that some of the operators have been sort of blacklisted. That means they can't operate at this point.
No, not at all. Nobody's been blacklisted. No. Correction.
What is their position?
Nobody's been blacklisted. We do have a situation where there are some operators that still have outstanding matters that they need to deal with SAHUC. Being part of the group SAMTOA, they were informed by SAMTOA and whoever the legal representation was that they should not come forward to SAHUC because of this, divide that seems to have happened. We've put in, the operator accreditation requirements out into the public domain, and as a result of which, operators know what the process and the policies are. They need to come to the table and they need to clear what is still backlogged in that particular way.
And me and my organization are not one of those who've now applied, just so that you know that, so you can count me out, right? But very importantly, the fact that some of these tour operators are working with SAMTOA are now effectively working outside of SAHUC, right? How much of a problem does that pose going forward?
Well, if they're not going to apply for accreditation, the ones that do apply for accreditation and will get accreditation, we'll deal with that in the manner that it is dealt with. At the end of the day, we need to understand that the two governments need to, come to an agreement. And at this particular point in time, support for SAHUC from Durko, support from the Ministry of Hajj for SAHUC is in place. Unless that changes, we have to wait and see what the governments make a decision on.
And here's the final thought. So if a tour operator does not work with or through SAHUC, right, and therefore does not apply to be accredited through SAHUC, as you just put out that accreditation notice, right, can they still deal with Hajjis, with Hujjaj? Can they enlist them and take them on the Hajj pilgrimage?
If the process for Hajj is going to be as it was in 2019 and before that, then unfortunately not, because we will make sure that when the quota is released or when the accreditation is released, we have to have accredited operators within the confines and the boundaries of SAHUC. It's not just a case of the boundaries of SAHUC, but SAHUC then activates operators in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on the electronic Hajj system in order for those operators to then do the administrative requirements in order for visas to be issued for the pilgrims.
And that's where we're going to leave it, Shaheen Essop. Appreciate your time, Chairperson of SAHUC. And that's another view, fascinating thought in terms of how different people perceive the role of SAHUC, the role of Durko, the role of South Africa, and how many numbers do we need as per our quota, and whether we are being prejudiced or not. You may have your own opinion on that one, and you can post your comments on all of our social media platforms, as well as WhatsApp voice notes or text 0617660355. More to come, including a chat to Maulana Ibrahim Bam about the history of the Newtown Mosque, or the Hamidia Mosque in Newtown in Fordsburg, opposite the Oriental Plaza, but also as part of our the how-to of Ramadan, how to keep your temper in check while you're fasting. I need some answers on that.